Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. JC here with another video on Action Taimanin. Today we're gonna check how stats actually work in the game. But before we start, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe if you enjoy the content. So please be sure to share this. It's kind of... it's not information that you can get easily in the game, so it's gonna be useful for everyone. And also, be sure to leave a big thank you Darius on the comment section below, because he's the man who did all the research and I asked him questions and he tested different things in order to answer all my doubts and probably your doubts as well. So be sure to leave a big thank you Darius, and let's get started. So we're gonna be checking a ton of stats, and let's start with HP. So each HP increase effect works multiplicatively, and those are gonna be the percentage effects, as you can see here. And the stat increase coming from Magatamas or supporters works additively. This is going to apply also for weapons in the case of attack and critical, and also stat training. So here, this 903, it's gonna be something that we add to our stats. So I'll go over here and I grab, I grab a whatever character, and here we can see the stats. So the stats that we have on the Magatames are gonna be added. This one, this 903, this 572, this 696, those get added whenever we equip them to the corresponding stat. Keep that in mind. And after that, the effects of the Magatamas or other supporters, weapons, skills, whatever, is going to be multiplied. Okay? So, now, let's see. The next part is going to be defense. Defense is going to turn into damage reduction, as simple as that. So, at 30k, your defense is gonna give you 81% damage reduction, which is our soft cap. From this point onward, you're gonna get diminishing returns, so try not to go beyond that because you're not gonna get that much value. In fact, we have a hard cap at 62k, giving you 90% damage reduction. So by more than doubling your defense, you're only getting 9% more damage reduction. So as I mentioned, try not to do this. It's not proficient. Getting to that 30k is the sweet spot, and from that point, you don't need to have more defense. So here we can see a chart that expresses how this stat is going to work. So as you can see, for example, here at 2k defense, you're getting like, let's say, 8% damage reduction. At 10k, you're getting around 34% damage reduction. And here at 30k, we reach 81%. And from this point onward, you're gonna get diminishing returns. So try not to go beyond that because it's not worth it. You can use those effects to actually increase your attack. So now, skill training and stat training. As I mentioned, stat training, this one, is going to give you stats just like that, and they get added to your normal stats. But skill training, this one, you're not gonna see in the stats. Here it says stats in the character screen do not account or do not reflect bonuses coming from skill training. So you see this, well, it's not taking into account the defense skill training. So if you want to know your actual stat, what you gotta do is that you're gonna take your stat, multiply it by the bonus stage and the skill training, and then you're gonna have your stat in game, in battle. Okay, so that means that you don't need 30k to reach maximum defense. You actually only need 20k to reach that 81% damage reduction. Okay, and as I mentioned, the stat training is just added to your stat, but it is just so low that it doesn't really matter. Here we can see the exact numbers. If you don't know, this is what the skill training bonuses is going to give you, and the stat training bonuses. So obviously, the first one are going to be more impactful, and the other ones are just like okay to have, like they're not important, trust me. So we can get up to 25% HP increase, 50% defense increase or damage reduction. Well, no, it's defense increase because then we turn defense into damage reduction. Skill damage goes up to 37%, ultimate damage goes up to 75%, attack goes 25%, goes up 25%, critical critical is going to be both critical rate and critical damage. This is critical rate. It's critical rate. Critical rate goes up by 12.5%, and cooldown goes down 30%. So really, really useful. Please be sure to max this out. You do not want to play without those. Then, stat training bonuses. Well, it's not that much, as you can see, just 630 HP, 350 attack, 280 defense, and 490 critical. So, not that much, but still useful. Now, the training room. Something that you do not know about training room is that the dummy in the training room has a flat 50% damage reduction. So, to know your true damage, you're just going to multiply by 2 whatever amount of damage you deal. And sorry, and that's it. Unfortunately, you are never going to deal true damage. And why do I say this? Because all enemies in the game, even the ones on dailies, have some amount of defense, some amount of damage reduction. So you're gonna do more damage than you deal to the dummy, but not double damage. Just know that. Actually, with that information, you can actually calculate how much defense the enemy has, just so that you know. Now, let's see. VR enemies and stage effects. So, as we already know, the higher the step, the more stats the enemies have. We do not know, well, I'm going to show you, but the stats are hidden. Okay, you are not supposed to know this, but I'm going to share them with you so that you know, and you know how to calculate everything about the enemy. So, for every 100 points in an enemy stat, you're gonna get 1% for the corresponding effect. Let's say that the enemy has 100 points in defense. That means that they have 1% damage reduction. Simple, right? Let's say, what about critical rate? That 100 points in critical rate is 1% critical rate. Simple. Then we have the stage effects. The stage effects are effects that hinder the player or benefit the boss in some way. But the really, really important one is going to be the damage reduction for specific colors. And here, the game doesn't say how much, but it's 30% damage reduction. So let's say that I hit the suppress type damage reduction, and my Astaroth now, which is a suppressed type character, is going to deal 30% less damage, just because of that effect. But there's ways to mitigate this, and that's with penetration. Yeah, one of the best effects in the game, one that you want to have as much as possible, yet you still want to have damage increase effects. The penetration is not all, trust me. So, penetration ignores some amount of the damage reduction. How does this work? Well, it's a subtraction, as simple as that. So, let's say that I have 22% penetration, and the enemy has 50% damage reduction. Well, that damage reduction gets turned into 38. We just do a subtraction, as simple as that. So, the enemy is not blocking as much damage thanks to my penetration effect. Now, in VR, the bosses start with 50% penetration at step 1, and it increases 5% every 5 steps, reaching up to 200% at step 10. Yeah, so the bosses do have this effect, and basically they nullify our defense, which is It's kind of weird, but I mean, you can test it. Maybe I'm a little bit wrong on this, but you do your own test. So let's say that we reach maximum. We have 20% penetration, and as I mentioned, we have 80% damage reduction. Well, that's gonna be turned into 0 because it surpasses our own penetration, our own damage reduction. But what can you do? What can you do to mitigate this? Well, increase your HP. That's a way to circumvent this effect. So, anyways, let's go to the next one. Fortitude. Everyone thinks that Fortitude is the opposite of penetration, and that's not quite right. So, what is Fortitude exactly? It's a chance to treat any incoming damage as if you had invincibility, ignoring both damage and hit stun, which is really good. But there's few sources of Fortitude in the game. If you have, let's say, if you have a 20% Fortitude, that's a 1 in 5 chance to ignore incoming damage, or incoming attacks, because it also ignores the hit stun. So that's extremely useful. Can you abuse it? Actually no, there's a hard cap for this. At 60% Fortitude, you do not get more than that. So try to get Fortitude, yes, but don't try to abuse it. Unfortunately, the effects for Fortitude are pretty bad for the most part. It's not that the Fortitude is bad, it's just that the supporters that offer Fortitude have terrible activation conditions. For example, Homura, Witch Homura, gives you 16% Fortitude when your HP is below 30%. Horrible activation condition. 30 is too much. And what about Carol Emily? Well, she gives you 50% Fortitude when your HP is below 20%, and it only activates once per battle. Yeah, awful, guys, awful. Does that mean that I should completely ignore Fortitude? Not really. There's actually someone who can help us with that, and that's Natsu. With Natsu, you can use Smoke Cloud, and Smoke Clouds give you, and the allies within range of the skill, 20% Fortitude. And if you go blue, it turns into it turns into 30% Fortitude. So without the blue buff, you have a 1 in 5 chance to ignore damage, and with the blue buff, you have a 1 in 3 chance to ignore damage. It's pretty good. It's pretty useful. So let's go to the next stat, and that's critical damage. For critical damage, whenever you deal critical hit, you land a critical hit, you're going to multiply your normal damage by 1.75. Pretty simple, right? So you do 75% more damage. But that's not the only thing that you have to take into consideration. There's other effects that increase your damage, your critical damage, like all the critical multipliers, Magatama effects. Let me show you a Magatama. So I go over here and I grab, not this character, over here, and I grab whatever critical. So your critical is going to be 2.4, but remember, 100% is going to be 1. So what do? 1.024. You're going to multiply you put your damage over here, then you multiply it by the standard critical multiplier, and then you add any other multipliers, 1.024, and as you can see, this is a perfect Magatama, so I'm going to multiply again, 1.024, and again and again and again. Okay, this is not additive. This is not gonna be like how much is it? 12%. It's not going to be 12% multiplied by 12%. Just so that you know, it's multiplicative each instant of critical, well, whatever effect actually, not just critical. So Magatama effects are something to take into consideration. Buffs, the green icons that you get. Skill effects. What do I mean by skill effects? Well, every character has one skill that gets critical damage increase, like this one. Increase critical damage by 25%. We also have weapon effect, because some weapons give you critical, like this one. Also the supporter effects, like the best example is the classic Kowaru. Let's see, Kowaru over here. Yeah, Kowaru with her 48% critical increase, which is 1.48. Yeah. And supporter formation effects. The supporter formation effect is probably one of the rarest, because you can only select one. So not everyone is going to be using that in this particular bracket, but you can use it on something else like damage reduction, or maybe what else? Penetration, which is probably one of the most useful ones. And now, let's go to critical rate. So you know how much damage you're gonna deal. Now you need to know if you're gonna hit that critical, actually. So for critical rate, the formula is extra simple. You just use your critical stat. Let's go over here. Your critical stat, we're here. And we multiply that by 0.21. Each 100 is gonna be 1% for your critical. After that, you have to add, and this is extremely rare. This is not going to happen with other stats. You're gonna add 12.5% from your skill training if it's maxed out. The same can be said about the awakening skills. The awakening skills have critical chance increase for both melee and range attacks. So that's gonna be a 20% that gets added to your critical rate. Supporter effects. Let's say that I use a Suruga. The Suruga gives 16%, if I'm not mistaken, 16% critical rate. So yeah, that's another 16% that gets added. And let's check skill effects. Yeah, similar to the critical effect, we have skills that have extra critical rate. Those are kind of rare. Usually it's only on the pure color skills. And lastly, buffs. Of course, we have some characters and weapons and supporters that give you a buff for critical rate. Also skills. So be sure to factor that in. Now, Azusa. Azusa is the only thing that works different in the game. So if you know Azusa, she... I'm just going to show you Azusa. Where are you? Here. She has this extra passive that reduces the enemy's critical resistance by 28%, but it doesn't do that. So she is going to work multiplicatively. She's the only one that does that. Okay, whatever is your critical rate is gonna get multiplied by 1.14. Okay, it's not 28 for whatever reason. It's not 28. So anyways, it doesn't really matter that this happens. The actual benefit of this supporter is the penetration, the party-wide penetration. So just ignore the fact it's deceiving, but it's not even relevant. So next we have the damage formula. So Darius was kind enough to make the damage formula, and though it seems convoluted, he put the order, the specific order. The first thing that you're gonna take into consideration as multiplayers are Magatama effects, and then we put the buffs, debuffs, and other effects. But since we're multiplying, it doesn't really matter the order. It matters for the computer perhaps, but not for us that we're doing the formula. So what do we have? We have our base damage. And the base damage is gonna get multiplied by any damage increase, normal damage increase. Let's say, for example, as long as you hit the activation condition, you're gonna get the damage increase. Let's see. I'm trying to find someone. Torajiro. Torajiro is always a 30% damage increase, so she's gonna go over here. And, well, she would be actually over here. Here, we would have a Magatama. Let's say an attack Magatama. No, this is not the right Magatama. This one. You're gonna get 5 instances of 1.03. Yeah. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Remember that each is individual. It's not like we do an addition and then we multiply by that. No. So, after that, if you crit, you multiply by 1.75. And then you'll use the crit multipliers. Let's say that you have one critical Magatema. Well, you know, it's going to be multiplying this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And then you have maybe the effect of the weapon, the butterfly weapon. Well, whatever the stack is. Where are you, butterfly weapons? Let's go with Kahahirako. Whatever the stack is, you're going to multiply by that. Let's say that it's up to 50 stacks. That's 100% critical damage increase. So you're going to multiply that. And then the result is going to be final damage. But here we're going to do another thing. We're going to take into consideration the defense, or well, technically damage reduction from the enemy. And that's going to give us our final damage, okay? So if you know your true damage by using the dummy, you can calculate how much defense the enemy has, or how much damage reduction the enemy has. So that's a good thing. That's actually pretty good. So let's go to the next one. So VR has a ton of extra stats, and they have extra critical damage. So enemies have a 20% extra critical damage at step 1, which increases by 20% every 5 steps, reaching up to 300% extra critical damage at step 70. These buffs works additively. So basically the 1.75 multiplier for us, for the boss, is gonna be 4.75. Yeah, they're gonna deal a lot of critical damage. So, you want a lot of HP. Anyways, let's continue. So, critical rate resistance. You know it. It's very difficult to crit on VR, which is normal because the enemy has critical rate resistance. Again, the enemies, for every 100 points in a stat, they get a 1% for the corresponding effect. So 100%, 100 points in critical rate resistance is 1% critical rate resistance. Most enemies start with 10% critical rate resistance, and they reach up to 80% critical rate resistance at step 35. So yeah, pretty quickly they become practically immune to crits, which is good, trust me, and you're gonna see why in a moment. Be sure to check the stat charts at the end of the video for more info. You can check all the stats at the very end, but right now let's focus on enemy critical rate. So yeah, not only do they have less chance for us to crit, they also have higher chance to crit the more we progress. It's kind of obvious, of course. So for every 100 points, we get 1% critical rate. So enemies' critical rate goes from 12% at step 1 up to 72% at step 200, increasing 2% every 5 steps. Werewolf Knight is a little bit different. She goes from 14% up to 74% on the first stage, and on the second stage, she goes from 22% up to 82%. Yeah, she is more aggressive. We know that. So now it's time to talk about critical block and critical evade. Those two stats are actually pretty simple. They're, again, subtractions. So what we're going to do is that we're going to calculate the critical damage that we receive. Let's say that we receive 2000 critical damage coming from the enemy. And we have the awakening skill. So I go to whatever character and we go to awakening skills. So on the defensive part, we have this effect that says critical block melee and critical block range. So the critical damage that we receive is reduced by 40%. That's pretty straightforward. So what is the 40% of 2000? That's 800. So we just subtract 800 from 2000, and that's the damage that we're going to receive now. Simple, pretty simple. Now, for critical evade, it's exactly the same, but we're working with critical rate. Let's say that the enemy has 2,000 points in critical rate. That's 20% critical rate. And evade is only going to be 20%, not 40, as you can see. So we get the percentage, and it's going to be 400 points. So that's 4%. We do the subtraction, and we have 1,600 points, which is 16% critical rate for the enemy. So the more critical rate, the more critical rate the enemy has, the more critical rate we are subtracting, which is kinda good. But trust me, these effects are not your first priority. The damage reduction, these damage reductions are your priority. So, anyways, let's see. Now, enemy critical damage resistance. So yeah, not only do they have less critical chance, well, we have less opportunities to land a crit. They also reduce damage when we land a crit, which is awful. So the enemy starts with a 10% damage resistance, critical damage resistance on step 1, and it increases 10% each 5 steps, reaching up to 100% at step 50. So effectively, what it means is that this 1.75, we're going to subtract a 1, leaving us with 0.75. What does that mean? It means that whenever you land a crit, you're dealing 25% less damage than a normal attack. So you do not want to crit on VR. Funny. Even so, the crit has its uses. Don't worry too much, like Momochi weapon. But that is something to take into consideration. The memes, the crit memes, are just that, are just memes. So try not to rely on crit strategies for VR. Now, let's go to the next, and that's gonna be stat reduction debuffs. So you have been lied to. Any debuff that reduces an enemy's stat doesn't do that. Instead, it counts as another damage multiplier. For example, if we are talking about defense reduction, that's another damage multiplier for your character. So your stats are what are going to affect how much damage you deal. You're not reducing the defense of the enemy. It doesn't matter the stats of the enemies. What matters are your stats. Okay? So keep that in mind. The stronger you are, the more benefit you get from those multipliers. Lastly, here we have the charts, guys. So this is a chart for all bosses, and we can see the step, of course, over here from 1 to 200. Critical resistance, which, as you can see, it increases extremely fast. Critical rate, which maxes at step 200. Defense of the enemy, which you can use to calculate their damage reduction. Penetration of the enemy, which pretty quickly our defense becomes completely useless. Then critical damage defense over here, reaching that 25% penalty to damage, and add critical damage, extra critical damage for the enemy, getting an extra boost so that they multiply by 4.75. Nice. So we also have Wyrm Knight's critical rate, because it's different from the rest, just so that you know. And Action Taimanin on stage 2. Okay, the stats for Action Taimanin on stage 2 are different. She's weaker on stage 2. I mean, she was the first boss. She's obviously going to be weaker than other characters, than other bosses. So she has less critical resistance, but in the end, she's gonna reach the same point as everyone else. She has, let's see, penetration. She has more penetration at the very start. But it takes more time to reach its maximum. And actually the maximum is different. We have critical damage defense over here, which as you can see is not as aggressive as this. And added critical damage over here, which reaches its maximum at step 200. So yeah, I really hope that you find this useful and that you use this information to maximize the stat efficiency when equipping Magatama, supporters, and to calculate all your effects. Maybe there's some pieces of information that are incorrect. Let us know in the comment after testing some of these, because it's a work in progress. I'm still doubtful, especially about defense, because I don't think it's that useless. But, well, anyways. That's about it, guys. I hope you find this useful. Be sure to leave a big thank you, Darius, at the end of the video. And I'll be seeing you next time. Bye!